As the relentless Anatolian sun scorched the earth, the world of the Hittites was thrust into an era of turmoil and transformation. The once shadowy kingdom, known for its secretive priests and forbidden rituals, now stood at the epicenter of a storm that would reshape the ancient world. This was the age of epic wars, shifting alliances, and betrayals that would echo through the corridors of history for millennia. The Hittite Empire, masters of iron and keepers of ancient mysteries, was about to face its greatest test. The drums of war thundered across the plains. Imagine the ground trembling beneath the wheels of hundreds of chariots, the air thick with dust and the metallic scent of anticipation. The Hittites, once content to rule from the fortified heights of Hattusa, now looked outward, their ambitions stretching across Anatolia and into the heart of the Near East. Their armies marched beneath banners emblazoned with the symbols of storm gods and sun deities, their warriors clad in iron armor that gleamed like the scales of mythical beasts. But the path to power was never straightforward. Every conquest brought new enemies, and every alliance was a gamble with fate. The ancient world was a chessboard of kings and pharaohs, each move shadowed by spies, omens, and the ever-present threat of betrayal. The Hittite kings, guided by their enigmatic priests and haunted by prophecies carved in a stone, navigated this deadly game with a blend of cunning, ruthlessness, and a touch of desperation. The most legendary of these conflicts was the war with Egypt, a clash of superpowers that would culminate in the Battle of Kadesh. But the road to Kadesh was long and treacherous. Treaties were signed and broken with the flick of a stylus. Messengers vanished into the night, and armies gathered in secret, waiting for the signal to strike. The Hittites, led by the formidable king Mu'tali II, faced off against the might of Pharaoh Ramses II, a ruler whose ambition and ego were matched only by his legendary armies. The stakes could not have been higher. Control of the trade routes, access to the riches of Canaan and Syria, and the favor of the gods themselves hung in the balance. Both empires invoked ancient prophecies, both claimed the support of their divine patrons, and both believed that victory would shape the destiny of the world. The Hittite priests performed secret rituals, seeking omens in the flight of birds and the patterns of the stars, while Egyptian magicians called upon their own pantheon, weaving spells of protection and destruction. As the armies converged on the city of Kadesh, the tension was palpable. Scouts reported strange lights in the sky, and rumors spread of supernatural forces at work. Some whispered that the gods themselves would decide the outcome, and that the fate of empires hung by a thread. The Hittite war machine was a marvel of ancient engineering. Chariots built for speed and shock, infantry drilled to perfection, and commanders who understood the art of deception as well as the science of war. The battle itself was a spectacle of chaos and courage. Chariots thundered across the plain, their wheels slicing through dust and blood. Archers unleashed storms of arrows, while warriors clashed in brutal hand-to-hand combat. The roar of battle was matched only by the cries of the wounded and the shouts of commanders urging their men to victory. The Hittites, masters of surprise, launched a devastating ambush that nearly shattered the Egyptian lines. For a moment, it seemed as if the gods had favored the sons of Hattusa. Yet, for all its violence, the Battle of Kadesh ended not with a decisive victory, but with a stalemate. A result as mysterious as the omens that had preceded it. Both sides claimed triumph, and both would inscribe their own version of events on stone and papyrus. But beneath the surface, the truth was far more complex. Secret negotiations followed the battle, leading to the world's first known peace treaty, a fragile accord sealed with oaths to the gods and promises that would soon be tested. The aftermath of Kadesh did not bring lasting peace. The Hittites, and Egyptians continued their dance of rivalry and alliance, each seeking to outmaneuver the other in the courts of kings and the shadows of temples. Spies and diplomats became as important as warriors, and the fate of nations often rested on a single whispered secret or a well-timed betrayal. The Hittite king, ever wary, surrounded himself with advisors and informants, each with their own agenda and loyalties. But the wars of the Hittites were not fought only against foreign enemies. Within the empire, rival factions vied for power, and the royal court was a nest of intrigue. Princes plotted against their fathers, generals schemed for the throne, and priests wielded influence through prophecy and fear. The line between friend and foe was never clear, and trust was a rare and precious commodity. The palace of Hattusa became a stage for a drama of ambition and betrayal, where a single misstep could mean exile or death. The people of the Hittite Empire endured these storms with a resilience born of centuries of hardship. Farmers tended their fields under the shadow of marching armies. Artisans crafted weapons and armor for the next campaign, and priests offered sacrifices to appease gods whose favor seemed ever more uncertain. The empire's strength was tested again and again, and each trial left its mark on the land and its people. Yet, even as the Hittites fought for survival, they left behind a legacy of innovation and resilience. Their mastery of iron transformed warfare, their diplomacy shaped the politics of the ancient world, and their myths and legends inspired generations to come. The echoes of their epic wars still resonate in the ruins of Hattusa, in the tablets of forgotten scribes, and in the stories whispered by the wind across the Anatolian plains. The Hittite military was a force to be reckoned with, not only because of their iron weapons, but also due to their strategic brilliance. They perfected the use of the three-man chariot, a technological marvel that gave them a significant advantage on a battlefield. These chariots, pulled by powerful horses, could outmaneuver and outpace their enemies, delivering shock and awe in the heat of combat. The Hittite generals were masters of deception, often feigning retreat to lure their foes into deadly traps. But war was not the only weapon in the Hittite arsenal. Diplomacy, espionage, and psychological warfare played equally important roles. The Hittites were skilled negotiators, adept at forging alliances with distant kingdoms and turning enemies into reluctant allies. They sent lavish gifts to foreign courts, arranged royal marriages to secure peace, and used spies to gather intelligence and sow discord among their rivals. The art of the deal was as valued as the art of war, and the Hittite archives are filled with treaties, letters, and secret codes that reveal a world of intrigue and manipulation. Religion, too, was a battlefield. The priests of Hattusa claimed to interpret the will of the gods, and their prophecies could sway the course of a campaign or the fate of a king. Before every major battle, elaborate rituals were performed to seek divine favor. Sacrifices were made, omens were read, and the outcome of the war was believed to hinge on the approval of the gods. Some believed that the gods themselves took sides, appearing in dreams or sending signs in the sky to guide their chosen people. The psychological toll of constant warfare was immense. Soldiers marched for months, far from home, haunted by the specter of death and the uncertainty of victory. Families waited anxiously for news, their hopes rising and falling with every rumor. The scars of battle ran deep, not only in the land but in the hearts of the people. Yet, through it all, the Hittites endured, driven by a sense of destiny and the belief that their empire was favored by the gods. The legacy of these wars extended far beyond the battlefield. The treaties signed in the aftermath of Kadesh set a precedent for international diplomacy, influencing the way nations would negotiate and resolve conflicts for centuries to come. The stories of heroism and betrayal, of gods and kings, became the foundation of Hittite legend, passed down through generations in song and story. As the sun set over the blood-soaked fields of Anatolia, the world of the Hittites stood at a crossroads. The empire had survived the storm, but the cost was high. The scars of war would never fully heal, and the seeds of future conflict had already been sown. Yet, in the twilight of their greatest age, the Hittites remained a force to be reckoned with. A civilization forged in the fires of war, tempered by the wisdom of the ages, and forever shrouded in the mysteries of the ancient world. As the dust of battle settled over the Anatolian plains, the scars of war ran deep, not only in the land, but in the hearts of all who called the Hittite Empire home. The aftermath of epic conflict was never simple. Victory and defeat blurred together, and the true cost of ambition was measured not just in territory gained or lost, but in the lives forever changed by the clash of empires. In the royal court of Hattusa, the echoes of war reverberated through every corridor. The king, once hailed as a hero, now faced the daunting task of holding together a realm stretched to its limits. Advisors argued over the spoils of war. Generals demanded rewards for their loyalty, and priests warned of omens that foretold disaster if the gods were not appeased. The fragile peace with Egypt was a double-edged sword, an uneasy truce that could shatter at the slightest provocation. Diplomacy became a battlefield of its own. Messengers rode day and night, carrying coded letters and secret treaties to distant lands. The Hittites forged alliances with smaller kingdoms, promising protection in exchange for tribute and loyalty. Yet, every alliance was a gamble. Rivals plotted in the shadows, and the threat of betrayal was ever present. The world beyond Hattusa was a web of shifting loyalties, where today's friend could become tomorrow's enemy. Within the empire, the strains of war were felt in every village and city. Farmers struggled to rebuild fields trampled by armies. Artisans worked tirelessly to replace weapons and armor lost in battle, and families mourned those who would never return. The priests, sensing the growing unease, intensified their rituals. Sacrifices grew more elaborate, prayers more desperate, and the search for omens more frantic. The people looked to the heavens for signs, hoping for reassurance, but often finding only more questions. The psychological toll of endless conflict weighed heavily on the population. Stories spread of soldiers haunted by visions from the battlefield, ghostly apparitions, strange dreams, and encounters with forces beyond human understanding. Some believed these were messages from the gods, warnings of greater trials to come. Others whispered of curses unleashed by forbidden rituals or of ancient prophecies now coming to pass. The royal archives, guarded by elite scribes, became a repository of secrets. Here, the history of the wars was recorded in meticulous detail. Every battle, every treaty, every betrayal. But not all was written in plain language. Some tablets were encoded, their true meaning known only to a select few. Hidden among the records were warnings, tales of cities that vanished overnight, of kings who fell from grace, and of relics said to hold the power to change the fate of nations. The Hittite spies, masters of deception, continued their work in the shadows. Disguised as merchants, travelers, or even priests, they moved through foreign lands, gathering intelligence and spreading rumors. Their reports shaped the decisions of the king, sometimes averting disaster, other times sowing the seeds of new conflicts. The art of espionage was as vital to the survival of the empire as any sword or chariot. Yet, for all their cunning, the Hittites could not control every variable. Nature itself became an unpredictable adversary. Droughts withered crops, plagues swept through cities, and earthquakes shook the foundations of temples and palaces. Each disaster was interpreted as a sign from the gods, punishment for broken oaths, neglected rituals, or the hubris of kings. The priests worked tirelessly to restore balance, but the sense of impending doom was hard to dispel. Amidst the turmoil, the legends of the Hittite warriors grew. Songs were sung of heroes who faced impossible odds, of generals who outwitted their enemies, and of kings who stood firm in the face of chaos. These stories, passed down through generations, became the backbone of Hittite identity, a reminder that no matter how dark the times, the spirit of the empire endured. But not all legends were tales of glory. Some spoke of dark bargains struck in secret, of rituals performed in hidden chambers, and of knowledge too dangerous to share. It was said that certain priests possessed scrolls containing forbidden spells, capable of summoning storms or turning the tide of battle. Others believed that relics from the earliest days of the empire, amulets, weapons, or even fragments of fallen stars, were hidden away, their power waiting to be unleashed in the hour of greatest need. The tension between faith and fear, between hope and despair, defined the era. Every festival, every public ceremony, was both a celebration and a plea for mercy. The people of Hittite gathered in the great squares, offering sacrifices and prayers, their voices rising in unison as the priests called upon the gods for protection. Yet, beneath the surface, anxiety simmered. The memory of war was fresh and the future uncertain. In the diplomatic halls, negotiations continued. The peace treaty with Egypt, inscribed on silver tablets and sealed with the names of gods, was both a triumph and a fragile shield. Envoys traveled between capitals, exchanging gifts and promises, but always wary of hidden agendas. The balance of power was delicate, and a single misstep could plunge the world back into chaos. The Hittite kings, ever mindful of their legacy, commissioned monuments and inscriptions to commemorate their deeds. Reliefs carved into stone depicted scenes of battle and victory, of kings receiving tribute and making offerings to the gods. These images, meant to inspire awe and loyalty, also served as warnings to future generations. Power is fleeting, and the favor of the gods must never be taken for granted. As the years passed, the empire adapted to the new reality. Military reforms strengthened the army, new alliances were forged, and efforts were made to rebuild the lands ravaged by war. Yet, the sense of vulnerability lingered. The world was changing, and the Hittites knew that their place in it was never guaranteed. The legacy of these wars extended far beyond the borders of the empire. The treaties and diplomatic innovations pioneered by the Hittites influenced the politics of the ancient world for centuries to come. Their stories of heroism and betrayal, of gods and mortals, became the foundation of myths that would outlive the empire itself. In the quiet moments, as dusk settled over Hittite and the city's torches flickered to life, the people remembered both the glory and the cost of their struggles. The empire had survived the storm, but the scars remained, a testament to the resilience and complexity of civilization forged in the fires of war, forever marked by the mysteries and enigmas of its age.